so what we have is an individual, particularly, let's think about a child, being marinated in trauma from birth. So this is a child who is developing, who is supposed to be growing and learning and blossoming, who is instead buried in this stuff called trauma at every stage. It can be physical abuse, sexual abuse, emotional abuse, and chronic neglect in the child's life. Complex trauma also has another category, and that is that it describes people who have layers of trauma. Victims of this kind of trauma live in constant distress, and that has profound physiological impact on the brain, on the adrenal gland, all kinds of things that can often be things that last lifelong. They are not only under constant distress, but there's no exit door. You know, if you're 5 years old, you can't get away. So they have gross insecurity, instability, and ongoing pain and suffering. And in such an environment, the individual never gets to regain emotional equilibrium. You think about perhaps a car accident, maybe, that some of you have been in or witnessed, and how everything's thrown out of kilter. And it takes a while, particularly if you were driving, for you to even think about getting behind the wheel again and all of those things. But eventually you get some sort of emotional equilibrium, and little by little can claim that area of your life back. But when you live with chronic trauma, there's no place to do that. There's no equilibrium to gain. So for many, trauma is not a terrifying event, which is how PTSD has been described. It is rather a terrifying life. So as a result of chronic and interpersonal trauma, this individual will be extremely vigilant, very watchful for danger all the time, constantly expecting it, live with chronic anxiety and terror. All of their psychological energy is bent by necessity toward coping, which means things like hiding, self-protecting, rather than having that psychological energy bent toward learning and growing, which is where a healthy child in a healthy environment gets to go. They get to imagine, they get to experiment, they get to test, they get to learn. They don't have to keep coping with this trauma over here all the time. The victim has been betrayed and is often either separated from those who are caregivers and nurturers, or they are stuck with those who are not. There is no safe person in their life. They don't know what that means. So the child, as they grow, is supposed to be answering the question, who am I? What can I do? What can't I do? What am I good at? Do I matter? Do I have impact? If I cry, does somebody come? Am I lovable? Just as children develop knowledge and skills like how to walk and talk and eat or do math, so they develop a sense of self, a personhood, as we might say, an awareness and sense, a definition and assessment of myself. The impact of chronic interpersonal violence on that process is staggering. Secondly, complex trauma involves betrayal at its core. You think about this. The person is being hurt by someone they should be able to trust. Parent, grandparent, siblings, uncles and aunts, coach, pastor, teacher. Those are all the people that along the way of the child's growing who should be caretaking, protecting, teaching, nurturing. Those who should help not only fail to help, but repeatedly morally damage the child and erode their sense of self. So the self is marinated in abandonment, deception, blame, humiliation, and isolation. And you know when you marinate something, you do it so the flavor gets all the way in. So when you're a child being marinated in these things, it gets all the way in.